Good evening, and welcome to Virginia Rep's Bedtime Stories. Bedtime stories. They are magical, aren't they? So I'm going to open this book. And if you're ready, and I know I'm ready, let's see what we find. Tonight's story is Rumpelstiltskin, as told by Kira Burry.
Once upon a time, in a far, far away land, there lived a miller and his beautiful daughter. One day, as the miller strolled into town for supplies, he came across the king. As he was speaking to the king, he wanted to seem wise, smart, and important. So he told the king, "My daughter can turn straw into gold." The king was very interested by this. So the king said, "Bring your daughter to the castle, and I will test for myself to see if she truly can turn straw into gold." So the miller left and brought his daughter to the castle, and the king led her to a large room full of straw and a large spinning wheel in the middle. And the king said, "Spin this straw into gold by tomorrow morning. If you don't, I will banish you from the kingdom." The miller's daughter had no idea how to turn straw into gold. So all evening she paced and thought and racked her brain for how she was ever going to spin all of this straw into gold. Later that evening, a tiny dwarf appeared in her door. The dwarf approached the daughter and said, "Dear lady, I am happy to spin all of this straw into gold. What will you give me in return?" The miller's daughter thought, "I will give you the necklace around my neck if you can turn all of this straw into gold by morning." "Very well," said the dwarf. "Go take a nap in the corner, and by morning it shall be done." So the daughter went into the corner to take a nap, and the dwarf sat at the spinning wheel and spun all night until all the straw had turned into gold. The next morning, when the daughter awoke, the king arrived and saw all of the gold she had made. He took her down the hall to an even larger room with more straw, and he said, "Spin all of this straw into gold by tomorrow morning. If you do not, I will banish you from the kingdom." Again, the miller's daughter paced and paced all evening, not knowing how she would spin all of it into gold. Then later that night, the dwarf appeared again. He snuck over to the lady and said, "Dear lady, I will spin all of this straw into gold. What will you give me in return?" The miller's daughter said, "I will give you the sparkling ring on my finger if you can turn all of this straw into gold." "Very well," said the dwarf. "Go take a nap, and by tomorrow morning it shall be done." As she went into the corner to take a nap, he sat by the spinning wheel and spun until all of the straw had been turned to gold. The next morning, the daughter was awoken again by the king, and he took her to an even larger room with more straw than she had ever seen. And he said, "Turn all of this straw into gold. If you do it by the morning, I shall marry you and make you my queen." The miller's daughter paced, and later that night, the dwarf appeared for a third time. He approached the daughter and said, "Dear lady, I will be happy to spin all of this straw into gold. What will you give me in return?" Now the daughter had given away her precious necklace and her favorite ring. So she turned to the dwarf and said, "Dear dwarf, I have nothing left to give you." The dwarf thought, and a smile creeped on his face. "I will be happy to spin all of this straw into gold if you promise me your firstborn child." The miller's daughter was so upset and was not thinking clearly, so she said, "I will give you my firstborn child if you spin all of the straw into gold by tomorrow morning." "Very well," said the dwarf. "Go take a nap, and by morning it shall be done." He sat at the wheel all night and spun until all of the straw had been turned to gold. The next morning, the daughter awoke to a room full of gold, more gold than she had ever seen before. And when the king arrived, rejoiced by what he saw, he said, "Dear lady, you have done what I have asked you. Now I will marry you and make you queen of all the kingdom." And that afternoon, they got married, and she was crowned queen over all the land. 2 years pass, and our queen had a beautiful baby. One night, as she was putting the baby to sleep, the dwarf from 2 years earlier appeared at her door. He approached the queen and said, "Dear lady, I am here to collect what I was promised 2 years ago." Now the queen had forgotten all about the dwarf, and she was so upset and begged the dwarf, "Please, dwarf, I will give you all the gold in the kingdom. Please do not take my child." Now the dwarf, seeing her tears, felt very sad for her. So he said, "I will give you 3 days to consider. If you can tell me what my name is by the 3rd day, you can keep your baby." The next morning, she fetched for a messenger, and she told him to run out about the kingdom, high and low, mountain and valley, forest and river, to find the dwarf and figure out what his name is. The messenger left and searched all day and night. Late that evening, the dwarf appeared on the first night and approached the queen and said, "What is my name?" She racked her brain. Steve?" "No," said the dwarf. Bob?" "No," said the dwarf. Sugar Plum?" "No," said the dwarf. "I will be back tomorrow night. If you can tell me what my name is, you can keep your child." All throughout the next day, the messenger hadn't returned, and the queen paced, nervous that the dwarf would return in the evening and she would not know his name. So later that evening, when the dwarf did arrive, he approached the queen and said, "What is my name?" She thought, Dog Biscuit." "No," said the dwarf. Cherry Pie." "No," said the dwarf. Chocolate Ice Cream."
"No," said the dwarf. "I will be back tomorrow night. If you can tell me what my name is, you can keep your baby."
The next morning, the messenger finally arrived back, and he told the queen, "I have searched high and low, mountain and valley, forest and river, and towards the very end on the highest mountain, I came across a tiny man in front of a tiny cottage, dancing in front of a fire, and he was singing a song. Today I bake and today I stew, for tomorrow I shall the queen's child take. Ah, isn't it famous how no one knows that my name is Rumpelstiltskin?" The queen was so excited that the messenger had finally told her what the dwarf's name was. On the 3rd night, the dwarf arrived, and he approached the queen and said,
"What is my name?"
Stacy?"
"No,"
said the dwarf. Charlotte?"
"No," said the dwarf.
The queen then turned and said, "Is your name Rumpelstiltskin?"
"A witch! A witch!
just told you, said the dwarf, and he ran out of the room, defeated that he had not been able to take the queen's baby. And since that night, the queen and her child had never heard from little Rumpelstiltskin again.
Well, wasn't that a great story? You know, fairy tales truly are magical. So why don't you join me again next week when we open this book again? You never know what we might find. Until then, good night.